For the past 5 years or so, even amid all the noise around coronavirus and Brexit, one key issue has completely dominated crime, policing, and drugs in the UK. This is the story of how the war on drugs created a situation in which children across Britain are routinely and brutally exploited to sell crack and heroin. This is the story of County Lines.
You don't have to say anything that may harm your defence if you don't mention when questioning something which you later on in court.
No fire and what?
Everyone gets stabbed in Southend, bro.
In its most simple terms, County Lines refers to the practice of big city organised crime groups from places like London, Liverpool, or Birmingham, moving into smaller towns or even rural villages and taking over their drug markets. But drug dealers having to commute to sell their gear is not what has captured the attention of British society. It's that the people running these operations day to day are usually kids, often 15 or 16 years old, and sometimes as young as 11 or 12.
I was 16 years old when I first started getting involved with drug dealing and drug dealers. At first, they started off as partying with them, having fun. They had nice clothes, nice cars, money, all of it. For me personally, I don't remember saying, yes, I want to hold drugs. Yes, I don't remember saying anything like that. It just went from, hey, can you hold this for me? Hey, can you do this for me? Can you do that favour for me? To now I'm full-blown drug dealing myself.
Stories about County Lines started exploding in the British press from around 2015. Police forces seemed completely unprepared for this new type of drug dealing, and the press jumped at the shock value of the ages of the kids involved. What this goes to show is just how behind the curve police intelligence, politicians, and large sections of the media are when it comes to drugs. In fact, the roots of County Lines dealing actually go all the way back to the late 90s, and UK MCs like Joe Black had been rapping about going country since the mid-2000s. The basic business model of County Lines is pretty simple and very grim.
Usually it's like the guy at the top in his 30s or late 20s, and then you have the guy in the middle or the girl in the middle. Their job is reload and take people up and down from London to wherever they're going to. And then you have the ones at the bottom of the triangle, which are the runners. They're usually very, very young. And they're the ones who are most likely to suffer from the consequences, police and other drug dealers' rivalry.
It's almost impossible to know exactly how many people across the UK are involved in this trade. One estimate from 2020 put the number as high as 50,000 kids who are part of an illicit industry that's thought to generate upwards of £3 million a day. But the truth is, because of the nature of this sort of crime, the authorities simply don't know for sure. And though the roots of County Lines go back decades, it's been aggravated over the past 10 years by wider factors that have transformed British society.
I think what's key here is to situate County Lines within the context of austerity politics, which the government have been pursuing since 2010. Growing levels of inequality, decrease in social mobility have all meant that there are increasing numbers of young people, particularly from poorer neighbourhoods, who are unable to access the legitimate labour markets and to get the training and educational opportunities that they need to succeed in life. It comes as no surprise that the illicit economy, the drugs economy, would become a more attractive option to them.
I was a part of this life for a little over 2 years. It's like, work hard, keep grinding, and you'll make a lot of money, you'll become successful, you'll be this, you'll be like me, you'll be a top don like me. Here, take a few £100, go buy yourself a little tracksuit. They use that tactic on most of the kids, and I realised that because I was so young and so vulnerable, and I was so impressionable, and I was ready to do whatever these people wanted me to do, that's why they wanted to keep me around. My mum kept calling the police on me. She was always crying on the phone and stuff like that. So I feel like my family was suffering with me as well, so I shouldn't have put them through that.
Most of it is outside of London. I will go up there, me and my buddy over here. Yeah. You'll find one crackhead. Once the area is established, I'll get kids to go up there for me. From anywhere from like 12 to like 15, 16. Pay them like 300 a week. They need money. Mommy and daddy ain't got no money. So either they come to uncle. Uncle will send them out there, let them have a week, 2 weeks in boot camp. I'll go up them once, show them how it works. Once they get the hang of it, I'll just let them be.
But what letting them be actually means for organised crime groups is exposing these kids to extreme danger from rival gangs and often the customers themselves.
I've even witnessed countless stabbings. A group of young men were coming out from different sides of the road and they went directly for my friend. They were punching him. But I didn't know that the whole time they had blades in their hand and they punctured his lung. I look and there's blood everywhere. So, I'm crying and I'm trying to get the ambulance to come. When we went to the hospital, the doctor was like, he could have probably died in a few minutes. It was that they stabbed him that many times.
It's hard to overstate just how vulnerable and at risk these children are. Organised crime use a variety of methods to groom and manipulate children, but there's two very common instances. One is where a child is given a load of drugs and then robbed at knife point, but what the child doesn't realise is it's the people who gave them the drugs that have set that up. Another common instance is sexualised blackmail. The child, male or female, it's happened to both, are filmed in sexually compromising situations. They can be blackmailed in very intimidating and terrifying ways. That keeps them really working as slave labour.
But it's not just the fact that kids are easier to manipulate and exploit that makes them attractive targets for organised crime groups. Poverty and lack of opportunity may set the scene for county lines, but that's not what actually causes it. For that, there's another, even more important factor at work: the war on drugs.
Police are really, really good at catching drug dealers, but that is the problem. I used to work undercover, infiltrating inner city gangs. I was at the front line of the success of police in the drug markets. Each operation would result in people being imprisoned for over 100 years. So gangs have adapted, and the way that they've adapted is to use children, because children are the perfect buffer zone between police and drug dealer. It's policy that's created this. As soon as you prohibited drugs, it led to an inevitable path of children being exploited.
So he's got loads of coke. He's like loads of individual deals. That's probably about it, I'd imagine.
How much is that worth?
That'd be about 100 quid a deal.
As county lines dealing emerged into the national consciousness, as far as the police were concerned, if they caught a kid selling drugs, they'd caught a dealer. So, thousands of kids who'd been targeted and groomed specifically because they were already traumatised and vulnerable were thrown into the criminal justice system and ended up in prison.
I ended up getting into a conspiracy to supply Class A charge, and I done a 2-year, 4-month in prison.
In recent years, there's been some recognition from some parts of the justice system that what they're actually dealing with is a complex system of exploitation and manipulation, that many of those arrested as perpetrators are actually victims as well. In 2019, a landmark case used modern slavery legislation for the first time to prosecute older gang members who had recruited, groomed, and trafficked kids to sell drugs.
There's drug paraphernalia around the address, so you are definitely going to be searched under the Misuse of Drugs Act.
What he's told us is he's originally from Wales, via Kent, and now he finds himself in Great Yarmouth, and he's only been here for a short period of time, and he can't really give us an explanation. County lines, for me, really, is a business model that's based on exploiting people.
But there are still serious difficulties even here. For starters, it's generally much easier for the police to build a drug dealing case than a human trafficking case. And even when this law is applied, there's no guarantee it's providing the sort of protection that the police and politicians often claim it is.
The Modern Slavery Act was not designed with this demographic and this type of problem in mind. The key problem here that I see is the difficulty that exists in terms of drawing the legal as well as moral distinction between perpetrators and victims. Put simply, modern slaves can also become modern slave masters, and modern slave masters can become modern slaves. And I've sat in cases where the same young person was both being prosecuted for human trafficking offences, while at the same time running the defence that he was a modern slave himself for drugs charges.
But even amid this impossibly complex situation, the biggest obstacle to actually dealing with this crisis is that politicians still seem intent on beating the same old drums of the war on drugs.
Across government, we all have a collective responsibility to start to understand county lines, but importantly tackle county lines drugs. The gangs, the perpetrator, the individuals and the organisations behind county lines, so we can quite literally cut the head off the snake and get to the very root causes, the upstream causes of why county lines has become such an issue in this country.
When I hear a Home Secretary talking about cutting the head off a snake, it's just painful, because it's what Home Secretaries have been saying for decades and decades. But this isn't a snake, it's a hydra. You cut the head off this and many grow back and they all start fighting with each other, because police never reduce the size of the market. The big elephant in the room here when we talk about exploited kids being rescued is if you rescue 100 kids, that means another 100 kids get sucked into the whole thing because the demand remains the same.
As long as there's a demand, there'll always be a supply.
And is there a good demand?
Yeah, always, anywhere, everywhere.
The commitment of British police and politicians to protect children was also called into serious question in 2019, when it emerged the police were actively recruiting kids involved in county lines to become informants, known as covert human intelligence sources, exposing them to potentially dangerous situations.
The government has just pushed through a bill called the CHIS Bill, which is police jargon for informant or police spy. And this bill makes it easier for the police to recruit children. Now, this is a direct response to county lines, and it's part of the fear of a political crisis that county lines will inevitably bring. As an undercover operative, I experienced many near-death experiences, and I'm now diagnosed with chronic PTSD. That's something I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. Children are going to be facing these same dangers, and children are far more susceptible to mental health damage than adults are.
Using kids as spies might show how desperate the police are to crack down on county lines networks. But to really understand county lines, you also have to look in detail at which drugs the gangs are actually selling and who they're selling to.
This child exploitation phenomenon is specifically servicing one very narrow part of the drug markets, and that's the problematic heroin and crack cocaine market. There are solutions. If this was treated as a health issue, not a criminal one, if those vulnerable people were looked after by investment in their care, this child exploitation would virtually disappear overnight. Treatment services have been cut, whereas investment in law enforcement has gone up. And this is the wrong way round.
The exploitation of children is a constant feature of the war on drugs, from Mexico to Afghanistan. It's anyone's guess as to why Britain's leaders thought the UK would be any different, or why they thought their failing policies would succeed, where across the world they've only ever made things worse. But what we can probably say is that if you support the continued prohibition of illicit drugs, then you are supporting the continued exploitation of children, not just in Britain, but across the world.
We'd like to congratulate drugs for winning the war on drugs.